Okay, so we first, I will sing the prayer then, but it's the center, again, we're offering to the Buddha this amazing mandala, this universe full of marvelous things. Think like that as a request for the teachings. We think like that, okay? So we think, we'll say the words, this ground anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers. I mean, how wonderful. Mount Meru and the four continents. Think of all the marvelous things in the universe, the sun and the moon and everything else. We imagine this as a Buddha field and we offer it to the Buddha as a request for the teachings, and may all living beings enjoy this pure land. What a wonderful thought. And we imagine Buddha now happily receives our offering. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niryatayami. So now we state our motivation. We think we're going to rely upon the Buddha and his teachings, and we're going to listen to these teachings so that we can become a Buddha, so we can be of benefit to all sentient beings. That's one time we've said it already. Sangye chodan soke chonam la jancho baru dagni kyapsu chi dagi chonyen gi personam ki drola penche sangye drupa shog sangye chodan soke chonam la jancho baru dagni kyapsu chi dagi chonyen gi personam ki drola penche sangye drupa shog Sangye charan soke chodam la jancho badu dagni kyapsu chi dagi chonyen gi personam ki drola penche sangye drupa sho. All right. Well, since last week, what I did was I went and got the course notes written by Jonathan Landau, my dear friend for many years who lives in California. And he was the one who wrote this module. And we went through it, and kind Doris helped me by sort of redoing it and putting all the headings in, because headings, and you'll see now, Mary has sent it to you. There's a version for your phone and a version for your tablet, and it's much more readable because it's kind of, it's half letter size, A5 size, instead of that. And it's got headings. It's like a miracle. The headings make all the difference in the world, and Doris did a really good job, I promise. So there's a contents there and headings, and I really, 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 in this course, I want you to read those course notes. I want you to read that. It's like indispensable. John is so clear, so orderly. I'll just be saying a few things, in my kind of way, but he's really, the structure is there. John is just excellent. You can't do better than study that book if you want to understand the meaning of Tantra. I promise. So good. It's excellent, excellent book. Okay. So basically last week, we tried to sort of, to present the different levels, the different approaches in Buddhism, the different way of practicing, different levels of practice. So, we've been studying often enough the lamrim, this packaging of all the sutra teachings, and it's constantly stressed that even within that, there are levels of teachings, grades, gradations of teachings, according to the capacity of the student. So if we use that nice little model of junior school, high school, university, which I like to use for the first scope, middle, lower scope, middle scope, and great scope, then Tantra, the Vajrayana, Tantrayana, Mantrayana, Vajrayana, 3 different Sanskrit words. Yana is vehicle. That's the most advanced. That's postgraduate. So, and that's how we sort of roughly speaking talked, and I tried to describe a little bit the psychology, the philosophy of Tantra last week, and of course initially it's kind of weird to us because we're not used to thinking the mind like this. And that's the thing that I really want to say, that the Buddhist view of the mind all the way through these different stages is, and I'm not trying to be sort of arrogant like as if I know anything, unbelievably in depth, unbelievably sophisticated, unbelievably skillful, incredible view of the mind. Because all the way from here to Buddhahood, through junior school, high school, university, and Tantra, it's all about the mind. If it's not about the mind for Buddhism, it's a load of rubbish. Everything in Buddhism. Tsongkhapa says in one of his wonderful lamrim texts, this very poetic songs of experience or hymns of experience, his lamrim text, he says, everything is to be taken as sound advice because there is no contradiction between scripture and practice. That means every word in Buddhism, and that's why you've got to check carefully, because there's a load of nonsense published, especially by modern Western people, we are so beyond arrogant. We think it's just anybody can make up their own thing. Even a person doing a cookbook would be thrown out as a fraud if they thought like that. But we think that way when it comes to spiritual or philosophical, because we don't take it seriously, So everything to be taken as sound advice means every word, every sentence, every instruction, every technique that is labeled Buddhist, if it is valid all the way from junior school to Vajrayana, then there can't be a contradiction between the words written and the practice. Think like that. If there is, it's a load of rubbish. It's meaningless, you know. And that's a surprise to us because we think of Tantra, especially when you first go into it and you see all these pictures and all these millions of deities and these weird things. We think it's just this most cosmic, mystical, unusual. We can't get our head around it. We can't even imagine what it means, you know. But it's all psychology. And I think I wanted to, I always forget what we talked about last time because a few other classes have come in between. But to really try to get across, you know, this idea that the essential practice in Buddhism, the end result, we mentioned that, is you're trying to become a Buddha. That's the long-term goal of a Buddhist. And all the structure of the classes leads you to that. So the Sutra aspect of the Buddha, the one behind us. So here's a representation, you know, of the qualities of a Buddha. Perfect, completely subdued body, completely subdued speech, and completely subdued mind. That's what that is, literally a picture of. That is a depiction of that. It's not just some picture of some cute, quiet person. I think we don't think of art like that. We think art is some pretty shapes and unusual and creative and different techniques and different use of paint and different unusual and creative and radical. That's fine. But this is really like a mirror image. These Buddhas and this Buddha, they're literally a mirror image of what we want to become. So it's very precise, it's very detailed, very accurate depictions. But in other words, it's psychology. Seeing a picture of the Buddha, it's a presentation of what you are going to become. You know, it's a way of presenting what you can become. So the same in Tantra. So like I'm sure we talked last week. I should have looked up the video. I can't remember. Buddha, you know, there's different, yeah, we'll discuss that. I want to discuss that again now because this helps us get into the approach of the practice of Tantra. You know, last week we talked briefly about the sort of the psychology, the way of utilizing attachment, this concept, which itself is pretty radical and pretty unusual to us. But there's other way, the main way, the day-to-day aspect of Buddhist practice, as far as the Vajrayana is concerned, is doing these meditations on these different Buddhas. So let's look at that one, you know. So then again, just remind us, Buddha, the word Buddha refers to, when you become Buddha, think like that, or anybody's become a Buddha, it refers to their mind. The real Buddha is the unmanifest, not a physical body, pure, enlightened, all-wise, all-compassionate, all-powerful consciousness. Now think, consciousness or mind is not physical. Right now, our mind is locked into this bag of bones because of delusions and countless negative actions from past lives. This is Buddha's view. Gross bag of bones with, you know, all the stuff in it. I mean, we think that's a normal person, but this is where we've got to look at the Buddha's approach. We have a body now, so our consciousness has to sort of kind of go through this bag of bones. And so our mind is very limited. Our level of consciousness, for example, is the grossest level of sensory and a fairly gross level of conceptuality. We have very limited memory. We make up lots of nonsense stories. Our minds are really limited in their capacity for cognition, but the mind is still not physical. So when you completely become the Buddha, when you've removed the delusions and perfected the goodness, the virtues, then you're a Buddha. So what's your mind like now? Your mind will, you know, you don't need a body. You've gone way beyond needing bodies. We have bodies because of karma. And once you're a Buddha, you've gone beyond negative karma. You've gone beyond all the delusions, completely well and truly gone beyond. So there's no need for a body. So the actual Buddha, as we discussed, I'm sure we said it last week, Dharmakaya. John talks all about it in the course notes. All the words I'm saying here, he will make it all clear for you. I promise. His book is so delicious, his teachings. So Dharmakaya, it literally means, in this context, it means truth body. It's pretty abstract. The texts on this are really extensive, I promise. But, you know, but the Dharmakaya is truth body. Kaya means technically body. Well, of course, it's not a body in the normal sense. It's the mind. But that's the actual Buddha. So that mind, which is no longer encumbered by delusions, because it doesn't need a body, where's that mind existing? It's pretty abstract for us to try and think of something not physical, you know. But if you have got a mind and it's not physical and it's an enlightened mind, has infinite wisdom, infinite clarity, infinite compassion, infinite goodness, then it's not confined. How can something not physical, think about this, be confined by space or time or matter? It can't be. So this is why, just like the Christian said, I know when I was a kid, I loved the idea that God is everywhere. Well, that's exactly the same here. The mind of a Buddha is literally pervading wherever there is existence, you know. That's the Dharmakaya. Now, because, you know, people like us, we can't communicate with that. We can't communicate with that. So out of infinite compassion, because that's why Buddhas have become a Buddha, out of compassion, that's what's driven them to become a Buddha. They only want to help sentient beings. It's a spontaneous and natural impulse. It's just there. There's no I will think I will help somebody. No way, it's just natural. And by that point, they have got the ability to manifest their mind spontaneously, simultaneously, in as many forms as they like, through as many universes as they like, for the sake of as many sentient beings that are existing throughout the universe. This is the capacity of a Buddha, So they manifest in bodies. So now that's the form body. You've got this family tree, Dharmakaya at the top, then goes down, and you've got the form body. That's called Rupakaya, form body. Now there's two of those. Now one is called the Nimanakaya, which means the emanation body. Now the supreme emanation body, as they call it, is a depiction of Shakyamuni Buddha, of the founding Buddhas. Millions of beings have become Buddha, but at different times in history, there are the founding Buddhas, and that's known as the Supreme Dharmakaya. The next one in our time is called Maitreya. Then there's another kind of Nimanakaya, an emanation body, and this is where it sounds pretty cosmic to us, because the Buddha can manifest in as many bodies as they like, as wherever they are in all the realms of existence. So they're going to manifest as dogs and ants and hell beings and gods and humans, your next door neighbor, the smelly, the smelly old ugly uncle who you can't stand. The Buddha's manifesting continuously in these different forms, and that's like the regular Nimanakaya. Of course, you can't see it. You just see a smelly uncle. You can't tell it's Buddha. Tibetans have a lovely saying, you don't know who anybody is, so don't judge, It's very powerful. But not only that, because the Buddhas have complete control over all the elements of the universe. That's why if we understand the Vajrayana model, we're all made up of the four elements. Well, and minds are conjoined with the four elements. So these Buddhas are so magnificent, so amazing, so skillful. They can manipulate the elements, and they can manifest as a bridge, a computer, a lamp. I mean, this is kind of very fascinating. That's all Nimanakayas. That's called the Supreme Nimanakaya. And the other kind, I forget the Tibetan word for it, is all those, certainly in Tibet, who've been formally recognized as a reincarnated Lama, a reincarnated holy being. So His Holiness, for example, is said to be a Buddha. So he is one of those Nimanakayas, and we can't tell who they are either, So there's three kinds of these emanation bodies. Now, and the only reason is because we have got bodies and we need someone to manifest at a level that's similar to us. So that's why Shakyamuni manifests as an Indian person who spoke the language of the people then. Dalai Lama speaks English, or whatever, How kind. So we can hear the teachings. We can't manifest, we can't access the Dharmakaya. Now you've got the joy, the enjoyment body, they call it, which sounds delicious, doesn't it? Enjoyment body. Wow. The Sambhogakaya. And that usually is depicted in Tantra. So you've got this little kind of family tree. You've got Dharmakaya, Rupakaya, Nimanakaya, Sambhogakaya. And that's Tantra, Sutra and Tantra. Here's a depiction of the general, the accomplishment of the qualities of a holy being whose practice was probably mostly junior school and high school. That's the junior school and high school. You're a liberated being, you've liberated, and it's the emphasis on all those first stages of practice where you control the body, control the speech, control the mind. And now you're really powerful and got effortless control. That's depicted by this Buddha. Then you've got the tantric or the bodhisattva aspect. And that's the enjoyment body. And that's where you see all these gorgeous, like Tara and Chen raising all these naked, gorgeous looking, delicious people looking all young and beautiful and vibrant and blissful. And that's the whole approach coming from the Vajrayana, which is this very different approach, And this is where Lama Yeshe talks so beautifully about it, and John talks about this. So I want to talk about that tonight, the attitude, the approach. And this is how Lama taught us from day one, from the time he met Western people, he talked like this. It's incredible. He was so kind, He didn't give us long, complex teachings about Tantric. He said Tantra is highly technical. It is. He didn't talk like that. He talked about the psychology, the approach. And that's what I wanted to talk about tonight, I mean, forget about being a great yogi who's got renunciation, bodhicitta, and emptiness, who's completely got incredible high realizations, who's got single point of concentration, and who can energize bliss in their meditation and then get some realizations. Forget that level. Come on. That's highly advanced. Like someone said last week, we can start to try. Yeah, you can try tough love with your kid. Based on wisdom, you can transform anger. You can look angry, really you're full of compassion, and you tell your kid, you go to your room. and you know it's coming from compassion. That's using anger in a simple way in your daily life, but you can't play with that. So how do we use attachments, you know? Because attachment is the cause of all the suffering. It's the poison. It destroys us. We're mentally ill with attachment at levels we can't even imagine. So the level Tantra talks about is simply at the level of contact with sense objects, you know? That's the grossest level of attachment. So these Buddhas, I'll say about the Buddhas again, and we mentioned last week. So that, you know, in the Tantric one, you've got the main Tantric aspect of Buddha is called Vajradhara, or in Tibetan, Dorje Chung. And he's the Bodhisattva style, sitting full lotus on a multicolored lotus, on a sun disk and a moon disk, which represent compassion and wisdom. And again, these depictions are completely a visual language. Every tiny thing plays a role in depicting to us the meaning of that Buddha. This is quite literally psychology. I'm not even being sort of sarcastic when I say that, trying to make it psychology. It is only psychology. So for example, so like I said, there's Vajradhara, this radiant blue being, Bodhisattva style, wearing silken clothes and elaborate and beautifully. It's like the Indian royal style, you know, with the hair partially held up with this 5-pointed crown, earrings, all looking gorgeous. And it's meant to lift us. It's meant to make us joyful. It's meant to energize us. And this is how Lama talked all the time to all the depressed, self-piteous, self-hating hippies, you know, back in the 70s. And when we haven't changed now, there's no difference, I promise. I walk around the streets now, you might as well, we're looking like hippies, same clothing, same flip-flops, same shoes, maybe a few different things, you know. It's very interesting. Anyway, so Vajradhara, he's like, as I told you this lovely story when I first went to Kolpan and I was typing all the prayers and doing the Gestetner and the Ronios. Old people will know what I'm talking about. The equivalent of photocopy machines back then. And I was so happy. I'd found my home. I just walked in, you know, started typing and editing. And I was doing all these prayers. I kept coming up with the name Vajradhara. I kept coming up with the name Dorje Chung. That's when I discovered he was the biggest Buddha deer. Lama said, yeah, he's the biggest Buddha deer. I was so happy. I like the biggest Buddha. So happy. So anyway, under Vajradhara, you've got the 5 Buddha families. Each of those Buddhas, now it's odd, and I can't work out why, and I asked one Lama, but I couldn't get the answer. They're actually in the form of the Nimanakaya, which is the Nimanakaya form of the body, usually the Buddha, usually looking like the Buddha. So if you see Amitabha, if you see Akshobhya, they're basically looking like the Buddha with his begging bowl, you know, but slightly different. But they're still, nevertheless, it's still Tantra. And there are the 5 of them, and each of them is a representation of a transformation of one of the main delusions. This is so delicious. This is the point about Tantra. So right there in the first level, you can't even engage in the chocolate cake because you're out of control, baby. You just, you know, you've got no control over your attachment, no control over your anger, no awareness even of your mind. You're just following your senses like an animal. This is how we are. Look at the universe, excuse me, with respect. So we've got to start harnessing the servants of attachment first, and, you know, stop jumping on every girl you feel like it. Stop eating every piece of cake you feel like it. Stop, you know, lying and killing and stealing. First those, and then you get the message and you realize, well, what's the point of controlling myself, you know, in not killing, but I'm going berserk eating too much cake? You're just counteracting your own hard work, because attachment works in a multitude of ways. So you kind of get the message at that level, and, you know, you've got to develop discipline. You've got to harness the energy of attachment by harnessing the servants of attachment, controlling your body and controlling your speech. This is so stupendous. We really just don't like that level of practice. We just say, oh, I want to meditate. But you can't possibly control your mind. You can't possibly even know your mind if you can't control the servants of your mind. This is why it's so clear as the first level of practice, you know. So at that level, attachment is the poison. And then all the others coming from it, anger and the rest. You know, look at the world, look at the suffering of the world. So that's the first level of practice. You keep away from the chocolate cake, just speaking, you know, example. By the time you get to the next level of high school and you really get a bit of concentration and you start to work on your mind and you really begin to harness attachment. And as I said last week, you've got renunciation of suffering and its causes, which is the main energy of the first stages of practice, which the Buddha is a depiction of. When you've got renunciation of suffering and its causes, first of all, it sounds depressing, but first of all, how would you be? You'd be blissful, you'd be joyful, you'd be radiant, you'd be fulfilled, less anger, less attachment, you'd be amazing. And if you've really got renunciation, which is the accomplishment of the first of the 3 principal aspects of the path, the first of the qualifications for entering into Tantra, at least an appreciation of this. But as Amazova says, if you've got renunciation, then just the thought of another moment of attachment is so disgusting. It's like being in a septic tank. So I mean, that proves we've got a way to go, because attachment is our default mode. And this is the thing that's so humbling when we just understand the Buddhist psychological model. These delusions go to unbelievably subtle levels. We should be very humble and patient with ourselves because of that, not put ourselves down, you know. So when you've got renunciation, you're pretty incredible. So that though at this point, you can happily eat chocolate cake, and as the way Lama Yeshe puts it won't make you berserk. Even when you're thirsty on a hot day, you can't have control over your attachment. Just for a glass of water, your mind goes berserk. We get absorbed in the object. That's the point. And that's why in the high school level, we need to understand the technology of the way the body works, the way the senses work, and the way these delusions work with the body. And when you really learn that in Tantra, they're the ones, as Lama Yeshe said, it's sophisticated technology, physical and mental technology. And that's not a joke, you know. So the second level, high school, you could say you can eat cake without going too berserk. Now you get to the compassion wing and you get some bodhicitta. You can stuff cake in all day and it will not disturb your mind because you are completely full of compassion for others. And who cares about cake? You're not interested. You don't have attachment. You don't need it. You'll eat it for the sake of others. It's water off a duck's back for you then. Then you get to Tantra and you're the most sophisticated practitioner with your bodhicitta, with your three principles, with your renunciation, your bodhicitta, and your emptiness. You have no longer in the thrall of all the nonsense, all the objects of the senses. That's when you're qualified to actually actively contact the object of the senses and utilize that bliss in conjunction with concentration. Again, it's technical. That's the ideal scenario of the actual practice of Vajrayana. So now how do we apply that psychology? And that's how Lama tried to teach us, you know. It's really wonderful when you hear it. But it's difficult. You'll see, because we have so much self-pity, so much self-loathing, so much depression, so much anger, so much attachment, so much dissatisfaction. As Lama Zopa says, dissatisfaction, which is the energy of having practiced attachment in past lives, to the point where we're born with this deep feeling of never being enough. It's the most, he says, it's the worst suffering in the West. So these five Buddhas, this is the amazing aspect of the Tantric deities, the Tantric Buddhas, the Buddhas depicted in Tantra, which is the same Dharmakaya, but just dressing up in a different set of clothes. Buddha is Buddha, you know. But there's different, he's acting in a play. So the five Dhyani Buddhas, the five delusions, which each of these Buddhas is a depiction of a transformation of. Amitabha, he's the transformation of purified attachment. Akshobhya, Amitabha's red. Akshobhya's blue. He's the manifestation of purified anger. Vairocana is white, and he's the manifestation of purified ignorance, the root delusion. Ratnasambhava, I think, is yellow, and he's the manifestation of purified pride, I think. I got confused now, I'll check it up. And then the fifth one, he's green, and that's Amoghasiddhi, and he's the purification of purified jealousy. I mean, doesn't this sound delicious? These words we are so intimate with. We are so intimate. I mean, you don't have it in modern psychology, you don't get a practice which is the transformation of bipolar or the transformation of OCD. No, we don't know how to do that in our psychology. Buddha's so amazing, so sophisticated. I mean, as if I know, you know, it was just so delicious. So this is already telling us how amazing Tantric psychology is, that you could actually not just develop the goodness, but because, and this is the marvelous thing about Tantra, and these amazing Indian yogis were the ones before the Buddha, they discovered this. Because they understand the way the construction of the universe, which is the four elements, is the matter and the minds, and they're in the Vajrayana, the matter, the mind, all minds, each of our minds is inextricably linked to our own set of the four elements. So Tantra is really sophisticated in this knowledge. And those four elements are our physical energy. So by doing the practices and the mantras and the prayers, that purifies our physical energy. So we can become a Buddha, we can transform our mind and body simultaneously in Tantra. This is why it's such a quick path. So then all the delusions too, because we're no longer in the thrall of the delusions, you can utilize those delusions. I know it sounds weird to us to say that, but I think it's logical with the one of anger, but the real way you utilize is by the Buddha's manifesting in these different forms that are representations of these purified delusions. So there's 4 levels of Tantra, and John talks about this in the course notes. And at the most advanced level, it's called highest yoga Tantra or highest Tantra. Then that's where this is really plays out, So there we go. So, for example, there's a Buddha. There's the 5 Buddha families and all the other hundreds, in fact, probably thousands of Buddhas, because there are thousands of states of mind, and each one of them precisely is a manifestation of either a virtue that you want to cultivate or a delusion that you want to get rid of. I mean, there's no other choice. That's it in Buddhist psychology, So as many states of mind as there are is as many manifestations of the Dharmakaya in a form that is suitable to help you subdue that quality. It's such a marvelous concept. And this is why Lama Yeshe was very amazing in the beginning. He taught these ideas almost immediately. There's a practice that it's talked about in the Mahamudra book, and Lama gave that first in Australia in 1980, when he gave Mahamudra in 1982 or something, 81, I think. And because it's taught in the framework of Vajrayana, he then gave Haruka Chakrasamvara initiation for the first time in Australia, which is Lama Zopa and Lama Yeshe's main Nidam, their own personal meditation deity. So then that's that. So that these Buddhas are all different manifestations. So there are the peaceful ones, for example. So Chenrezig, compassionate-eyed one. He's a manifestation of love and compassion, and by practicing him, and of course you've got to buy into that meaning. It's not self-existent. It's also dependent arising. Chenrezig is merely labeled as well. But we buy into that meaning when we see Chenrezig with the antelope skin. We do it every Saturday morning for this coronavirus practice we're doing, the IMI Sangha are doing. He's got his antelope skin on one shoulder. He's got his crystal rosy on his one hand, his lotus on the other. He's got a sweet aspect, a peaceful aspect, and he's the emanation of the soft, infinite, compassionate kindness, a soft aspect. Now, they say there are 4 ways that our gurus and the Buddhas will manifest to benefit sentient beings. So that's a peaceful way. And that's always the best way. They say the best way to get sentient beings, to subdue sentient beings, to help sentient beings is to use peaceful methods. But there are some thick-headed ones, aren't there? So you've got to use the next one. They call it wrath. Well, be simple. It's called anger, okay? Wrath sounds very holy. It ain't holy. It's just called anger. But if you're a Buddha who's only existing for the sake of others, who's gone beyond delusions, who's gone beyond everything, and has only got virtue, they're infinitely skillful. They can manifest in any shape they need to be of benefit to sentient beings. So that's the wrathful Buddhas, I mean, if you met, so from one of those, for example, it's called Yamantaka. It's one of the main ones in our Gelugpa tradition. If you take a first highest yoga tantra initiation, empowerment, traditionally it would be Yamantaka. If you met him in human form, he would scare the life out of you. 40 million legs and arms and naked and swords and snakes. I mean, it looks insane. And you say, oh, excuse me, is that psychology? Well, yes, it is. It's a highly intricate language. You've got to learn it. So Yamataka is wrathful. He's a wrathful aspect of Manjushri, the Buddha of wisdom, the main one in the Gelugpas, Actually, there's a story. A friend of mine, he woke up in the middle of the night. He heard some glass breaking in his kitchen. And he walked out, and there was Yamantaka in complete form, the Sambhogakaya, filling the entire kitchen. And there was a broken bottle on the floor. And he told His Holiness, and he said, His Holiness says, you should keep that glass, yes. So he had the vision, there was Yamantaka. And he said it was total wrathful, complete, perfect form of Yamantaka. And he said he was unbelievably sweet energy, infinitely sweet. But there was this vision of Yamantaka completely formed. And I'm just telling you an experience of somebody, okay? But then you're going to see them in human form as well. They're going to manifest in human forms. So this is always a nice story I tell. My mother My mother was a wonderful human being. I love my mother. I adore my mother. She's such a good mother. She had 8 babies. One died eventually, but she had 7 daughters and a son. And she didn't have them until she started when she was 34, for God's sake. And she had 8 in a row. She was quite tired. And she taught music. She ran the family business because my father was a bit hopeless. He'd drink beer and play snooker and everything. Anyway, I love my father too. So he was a Londoner. He came to Australia when he was 14 or something. Anyway, my mother, who I'm adored, she's very talented. She was a musician, a singer, and a pianist, really talented. My father was a bit of a poet. And my mother was the one who had to run the family business, run the family. She was and she died of exhaustion, I think, at the age of 71, you know. I love my mother, but she was proud, like all of us. She's got the different delusions. Proud, she get depressed, you know, but she was very proud. But she taught music, and she had all these students. I know when we were brought up as kids, we were brought up with gay men. All my mother's students were gay men. I mean, Brenchley and Ronald and Gerald, and Ronnie had a car called Priscilla, and he'd pick us up at school, you know. We loved all our gay men. We just got used to gay men. We're not only gay women, but all my mother's students, music students, wonderful, talented singers and pianists. And they adored my mother because they confided in her, you know. She never confided in anybody. But anyway, when I became a nun, she was devastated, but she was so kind. And I was in Australia in 1979. I'd been a nun about a year. And this is an interesting extra story. I'll tell you this extra piece, actually. When I was living in England at our big centre there, and I hadn't taken any initiations, any empowerments yet. And I was already a nun. I was working for Wisdom. And I heard about that Lama was going to go to Australia and to give Vajrayogini. Now, Vajrayogini is this gorgeous, naked, delicious red lady with divine breasts, naked, and she's starkers, as we say in Australia, this divine being, and she's the manifestation of purified attachment. Okay, attachment. So, and Aruka Chakra, whom I mentioned before, he's the male manifestation, and they're consorts. They're like girlfriend and boyfriend, you know, and you do individually or separately. Vajrayogini, you can do her on her own. Anyway, she's the manifestation of purified attachment energy. And they all say, because, yeah, okay, saying so many things, I need an editor in my head. I'm very sorry. I put it aside and I forget it. So there's another thing here that I did mention this last time, I think, and this is why Lama was so amazing in teaching us the tantric concept from the very beginning, the concept of transformation, the concept of utilizing rubbish and turning it into goodness, you know, the concept of alchemy, the analogy they use. So they say that in very degenerate times, attachment, the deities that are the personification of purified attachment are the best ones to do, because the times are completely rampant with attachment. And that's why Lama could see that we were ready and ripe to hear Tantra, because there's so much attachment. We're so sophisticated in our attachment. We're ripe and ready to hear the teachings, you know. So he was so amazing from the beginning. So anyway, he was giving Vajrayogini in Australia. And I was so sad I wouldn't be there, you know. I was in England. And I told Lama I wanted Vajrayogini. He said, I will give you to her one day. He said, I'll give her to you one day, he said. So I remembered this. And I heard he's going to be in Australia and he'd give Vajrayogini. This is about my mother as well. Anyway, then suddenly next day, one nun who was supposed to go to Australia with Rinpoche and Lama to do the tour of Australian centres in 1979. I'd been a nun for about a year and a half. She was supposed to go. She said, Rita, I can't go. Will you go for me? I was so blissed out. You know, I was able to go to Australia. I went all the teachings and I took the Vajrayogini, you know, but even though I wasn't qualified, but Lama just said he'd give her to me. So I took her, you know, I got her. Anyway, at that time when I was in Melbourne, my mother I wanted to meet Lama Yeshe. And this is also telling the story about Wrathful, okay? Many stories all coming together here. So my mother wanted to make me happy because she adored her Bobsy. I'm Bobsy for my mother, okay? And she adored me. So she had a party in her house, invited all her friends, including all her gay friends, probably, obviously, and she charged $100 a head, and she had a party to raise money for Kopan. I was so happy for her, but I wanted her to meet Lama. So I dragged her up there to meet Lama, and she was really nervous with Lama, and I wasn't going to be at the meeting because she doesn't confide in people, and she would never have told her problems. But Lama was very powerful, and Lama was very charismatic, and Lama didn't have to open up or say anything. She just started, he told me later, she poured out her heart, you know, telling all about me, the problems we had, because we had a pretty intense relationship. She poured out all her problems to Lama. And I can imagine, because he was just very powerful, she just poured her heart out. So at the end of the meeting, I picked her up and took her home, and I could feel she'd been really moved by Lama, but she was mad at him. Oh, she was so upset. She said he kept looking at the television when I was talking, you know. So she was so offended. Her pride was really offended. And the thing is, So this is my feeling. And then she was a friend with Adele Hulse. I went to school with her. We both went to the Catholic convent, Adele Hulse, and she's a student of Lama Yeshe's, and I met her later. And she's the author of Big Love, the biography of Lama Yeshe, right? She's my friend from school. We were both, and she was naughtier than me even at school. She was the naughtiest. Anyway, she and my mother were good friends. They'd drink sherry together and gossip about their mutual friends. And she was very open and funny. So my mother always talked to Adele, that Yeshe, not sure about that Yeshe. She didn't mind Zopa because he looked humble, you know, she could handle Zopa, but she couldn't cope with this Yeshe. Anyway, I thought, oh my God, she's criticizing a bodhisattva, blah, 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 whatever. And then I heard this lovely story from Geshe Dagyu, my friend George, no, somebody told me, I can't remember who told me. These bodhisattvas, what do you see? Bodhisattvas and Buddhas. This is even before the tantric one. At the bodhisattva level already, these amazingly highly evolved beings who've gone beyond attachment and nonsense, they bop around in different forms in different lifetimes. Even the lowest level bodhisattva can manifest their mind in 100 different bodies simultaneously. They're so powerful. So these people are bopping around the universe, life after life after life, connecting to eyeball. There's a really important point about bodhisattvas in Tantra as well. They've got to connect with you. Otherwise, when they meet you 2 lives later, and now you're ready to be led to enlightenment, if you don't recognize them, they can't drag you to enlightenment. So they've got a long-term agenda to drag us all to enlightenment. So, but the first connection is they've got to make a connection with you. His Holiness Dalai Lama, millions of us adore him, right? We think we're so clever because we recognize a good person. No. He's worked so hard, life after life after life after life after life, hooking each one of us individually, I promise. And then we meet him in this life, we see his name and we go, oh, isn't he wonderful? He's got us in the palm of his hand. He did the work. He hooked us. And now he must have used peaceful methods because we think he's nice. But now the Chinese communists, he's also got them, but look, they hate him. He must have used wrathful methods to get them, but he's got them. Anyway, this particular bodhisattva, they go from life after life, and you can't tell a bodhisattva. They're not wearing halos. It looks like some Joe on a horse, and he's in some village, and he's made friends with everybody, meaning he's hooked them. His agenda is to lead them to enlightenment. If they're ready for it now, he'll give them teachings. If they're not ready for it yet, he'll give them a cup of tea, he'll say hello, whatever, and the peaceful methods are the best. But there was one old woman who didn't notice him, and he didn't want to leave her behind. You can't not have a karmic connection, because a karmic connection means you've met, and then when you see each other again in a future life, you'll connect. So he couldn't leave this woman behind, so he didn't know how to connect with her. She hadn't noticed him. So he saw that she had this beautiful garden. So he rode his horse through her garden. Well, guess what? Now she noticed him, and she's shouting and yelling and shaking her fist, and he is so happy. He got her. Now, he would not have been looking like a bodhisattva. He wouldn't have said to all the villagers, oh, I'm really a bodhisattva. No, they would have chucked rocks at him and thrown him out of town. He would not have minded, but he got her. And as the Lama said, this is a very powerful point. This is all the same as the bodhisattva path. It's the tantric path as well. They're all bodhisattvas. As the Lama who told the story said, when it comes to connecting with a bodhisattva, not to mention a Buddha, it's better to have a bad connection, meaning she got mad at him, than to have no connection, because she created the cause to meet him. So that's why the Buddhas use wrathful methods. That's why they're wrathful deities. That's why our gurus can be wrathful with us, because we are thick-headed and peaceful methods aren't going to work for us. So there are 4 ways that these holy beings work, and this is the manifestation of all these different delusions. It's so skillful, you know. So there are Buddhas that are manifestation of anger. That will be under the Akshobhya family. There are Buddhas that utilize attachment. I mean, they'd be gorgeous, they'd be very seductive, they'd grab you, they'd like you, they'd look after you, and they're hooking you using their seductive energy, utilizing their pure attachment energy. You've got to hear these words literally. That's the Amitabha family. Then you've got the other ones, jealousy family and all the others. So all the Buddhas fit into those, and all the Buddhas are capable of utilizing, because they intimately understand the mind. They've gone beyond them. They don't need them, but they're able to manifest in that shape and size for the sake of sentient beings, you know. So it is literally psychology in Tantra, literally. And it's so brilliant. But of course, it's highly sophisticated. Who can use attachment? The only person who can use attachment or anger is the person who's gone beyond it. This is logical, you know. But we can start somewhere. So the way Lama taught, so to get all the stories in about Lama, I got the Vajrayogini one. Using anger, yeah, my mother, I got that one too. So I was happy. After that, I was realized Lama, because see, that's the point. With my mother, if she'd been in that meeting as usual and kind of run the meeting, I'm not being arrogant. She's not arrogant. She was, you know, when you feel just uncomfortable and you want to talk all the time, she would have run the meeting normally. And Lama would have said, yes, dear, no, dear, 3 bags full, dear. But he didn't. He somehow did some action that upset her. So she would never forget Lama. He got her, you know. And the day she died, actually, in Australia, my sister rang me up and said, Mummy just died. Mummy just died. What'll I do? What'll I do? And I said, say Om Mani Padme Hum in her ear. She said, Om what? So she wrote it down and shouted Om Mani Padme Hum in my mummy's ear. And then I rang Lama Yeshe, who was just arrived in Queensland that day, 50 miles up the road. And so Lama did special prayers for my mum. So my mum, you know, Lama took care of my mum. I was so happy for my mum. He hooked her. So glad. He used Russell methods. He didn't beat her up. He's just a bit rude to her, that's all. You know. Okay, are we communicating, people? Am I making any sense here? I can't do all the thing that John does with all the structure. I haven't prepared in advance. I just got to say what I know, and it kind of come out my mouth, and hopefully by the end you'll have some idea. But if you read John's book, it'll give you some structure. Okay, you people? Thank you very much. Okay, so how did Lama teach us? Because he could see we're living in a world that is literally the personification of really advanced attachment. So what does that literally mean? Let's analyze that. What does that mean? Think about it. If you know, you go to a poor country or a poor house or a poor suburb in a rich country, don't go, you know, I mean, just go to a poor house. You're going to see it's going to be very sad. It's going to be not, especially if it's a poor country, and especially Tibet. I mean, Tibet back before the communist Chinese came along, as Lama said, the only place that you had music and art, this is a literally good, interesting point. The only place in Tibet where you found music and art and all the sophisticated sciences and the philosophy and the thinkers and the logic and the joyful things was in the monasteries. Everything was there, you know, all the art, all the music, all the metaphysics, all the psychology, all the astronomy, all the astrology, all the brilliant sciences, everything was in the monasteries. And the paintings and the statues and the color, everything was in the monasteries. The ordinary people's homes were boring. There was not much attachment objects, in other words. You know, Tibet was not the manifestation of attachment, that's for sure. So if you go to even the simplest home in the West, I mean, in general, you're always going to find poor people everywhere. Now, in general, in the modern world, that's a better way to put it. In the modern world, that includes Singapore, one of the most sophisticated objects of countries of attachment. You're going to find, this is the point, you're going to find there's different things. First of all, in our culture, you can see we're super technically brilliant. We've got brilliant minds. We're brilliantly educated, super educated. The level of education we get as ordinary people in our culture is like, for the Tibetans, what the Geshis get, but not the same stuff, not the same content, but the cleverness. And that in Tibetan is only in the monasteries. Back in Tibet, you did not have secular education. Now they've got it because the world is different. That's where the brains were, the brilliant, the minds. But everybody in our culture has, because we're secular, has got brilliant education. We can all write, we can all read, we can all do clever things, you know. So then we also, combined with that intelligence, we've got incredibly powerful attachment. So attachment energy is always, okay, this is an interesting point. At an unhappy emotional level, attachment is dissatisfaction. Always wanting something more, and it always embellishes. So when you've got attachment for the boyfriend, you get overexcited, you're all excited, and you make him divine. So like you're painting a really creative picture of a divine person. So attachment is actually super creativity. Think like this. All the minds, all the delusions are conceptual. Attachment is super sophisticated conceptuality that exaggerates, that enhances, that exaggerates the deliciousness of something. Now, look at a musician. I'm not talking the emotional part of attachment now. Get my point. It's a technical brilliance that is creative. So we've got super intelligent minds. So you combine intelligence with attachment. That's what a creative person is. That's what Bach is. You know, the sound. What attachment does, it enhances the objects of the senses. That's the brilliance of attachment if you can use it properly. If we use attachment and misuse it, it's like the attachment of an animal. And I'm not trying to insult animals. We're like greedy pigs, you know? So it's very low and gross. But if you've got a person who's got ethics and attachment, ethics and intelligence and attachment, because we're in an attachment realm, we're able to utilize that creativity and turn it into music, turn it into skillful writing, turn it into art. Because look at Picasso. I prefer Bach. I love Bach. I adore Bach. He had 23 children, had to write all these endless pieces of music every month just to keep up his payments for the church, you know. But look at Bach wrote. Look at the brilliance and the incredible sophisticated skill of the technical brilliance of Bach's music. That's the combination of intelligence and attachment. Think what I'm trying to say. It's a technical point. I'm not looking at the emotional gross level for the cake and 42 boys every day. That's the gross level for the senses. But if you separate the attachment from that, when you've calmed, and this is how you utilize attachment, when you've calmed down the gross grasping at the food and the grasping at the bodies and the grasping at the money, that's the really gross level of attachment. When you've harnessed that in the first and second scopes of practice, then on the Bodhisattva path and the Tantric path, you can utilize this technical brilliance of the ability of the attachment concepts to embellish something. I hope you're communicating with me. So a person like Bach, if he's an ordinary person, he had this brilliant ability to enhance sound. Charlie Parker, if anybody knows about jazz, Charlie Parker was this genius. He had the attachment, the brilliance, the technical brilliance of you take the simplest note and he could turn it into the most incredibly sophisticated thing because he could embellish it, he could enhance it because of his brilliant intellect and his brilliant capacity for attachment. But he also had the gross one. You know, I remember reading Miles Davis's biography about Bird. He died when he was 35. They thought he was 60 because he was completely overwhelmed by the most intense attachment to the objects of the senses. I mean, there he is having sex with a woman, having heroin and alcohol and food simultaneously, you know. His appetite was so enormous. That's the gross level of attachment. But if you take that away, you've still got a clever mind. You've still got a mind that can see a shape and enhance it. That's an artist. You have a sound and you can enhance it, but you've got to combine it with intelligence because attachment doesn't exist on its own. But if you've got lots of attachment, but you're very gross, I'm not trying to be rude about different kinds of music. There's a logic to all the kinds of music. But it's just, if it's very kind of like, or a person's behavior is very abusive and a person who can create brilliant pills to harm people, can create brilliant guns, super intelligent, combined with the ability to use conceptuality, which is attachment energy. I don't know if you're communicating with me, people. Attachment isn't just hunger for something. It's a conceptual state of mind. And when you strip away all the garbage part of it, that's what can be used, you know. Are we communicating here, people? So Lama Yeshe wasn't talking like that. So basically, we are in a time of unbelievable attachment. And I got off the point. So the real sign that we're living in a world of attachment, it's obvious, is that we've got incredible numbers of objects of attachment. And that's our intelligence. That's our brilliance. Our intelligence combined with dissatisfaction. So we're not happy with one kind of computer. We're not happy with, Steve Jobs, with his brilliance and his intellect and probably his bodhicitta, who knows, his wish to benefit others, he was able to utilize his brilliantly skillful, capable, intelligent, creative mind, which is the conceptuality of attachment, and he can take something and turn it into something brilliant. That's not just intelligence, but it's a mixture of kindness, helping others, intelligence, and attachment, you know. And why? Because and also the fact that we can locate and access and have these objects, endless numbers of food, endless. I mean, even one time, one of my friends was married to a Nepali in Kathmandu, and they had a simple house in Kathmandu with several jars in the kitchen of a few lentils, a bit of rice, humble house, the house of a humblest, simple person. And the mummy of the husband came down from the village, and she looked in the kitchen at the jars of food, and she said, "Oh, do you run a shop here?" I mean, she was used to going out and buying 3 grains of rice for dinner that day because they don't have any sense objects. There's no delicious sense object. There's no 40 million, 40 million variations of cake. I mean, get the point. I'm not being critical here because this is the part of it. This is the irony. Having access to even a grain of rice is the fruit of past generosity. So we created the cause, but at the same time, we're born in a world of unbelievable attachment. So the combination of our brilliance and our intelligence and our merit and our attachment, but the trouble is we don't understand the attachment, so it sends us to hell. It makes us insane because we don't know how to work with it all. But Lama could see, because we had so much attachment. Everybody has sex, everybody has drugs, it's so open, it's so naked, we're sort of swimming in attachment and its objects. So Lama could see that we were ready to hear these marvelous ideas coming directly from Tantra, that, that we can bring these into daily life. So how do you do that? And this is the point, in daily life. Well, one of the real powerful components of Tantra, and John talks about this, and Lama never stopped talking about this, and so we have to understand the technology of how this occurs, how it happens, is that Tantra is to do with energizing pleasure. Hear these words literally. It's the approach. It's the approach. So obviously in the early, so this is the, again, the analogy, in the early stages of practice, because you're a junkie, you've got to give up the object. You've got no choice. You're out of control. You're berserk with a junkie mind. You've got to calm yourself down. So you leave the object there. You harness your body and speech. You control. You get discipline. You live in vows. You do bucket loads of purifying. And all the emphasis is on removing the pollution. There's no talk about enhancing your joy yet. Come on. Forget about it. You're trying to calm yourself down. That's the energy. So we can get very depressed only thinking like that, and very fundamentalist, So because of that, Lama could see this. There was this massive misconception, and even if we haven't studied properly, and I haven't studied properly, but the bit I have studied, and most of us who are Buddhists, we don't study, we conflate. We literally see them as the same thing, attachment and pleasure. We can spend the rest of the day on this topic, and it's so powerful and so necessary to understand, I tell you. Okay, let's describe. So, okay. In the Buddhist model of the mind, hang on a minute. Where's my tissue? I didn't bring it. Never mind. Hang on a second. So when you learn the Buddhist model of the mind, that's in high school, in the middle scope, you learn that, as we talk about, that Buddha divides up all our states of mind, the thousands of states of mind in our mind every day, all like big soup of emotions, into 3 categories. The first, as we know, is all the neurotic, deluded, I-based, fear-based, ridiculous ones that lead us up garden paths and cause us pain and suffering and cause us to harm others. Look at the world. Then you've got the virtues and the goodness and the valid states of mind, love and compassion and kindness and intelligence. These are our saving grace, So first of all, the distinction between these two is enormous, already a revelation. Now, the third category is so interesting. They're called neutral, and that misleads us, like I've mentioned, because we think that means they're not important. No, it means they neither have the characteristic of the negative ones, which is very precisely laid out in Buddhist psychology. They're disturbing and they're totally delusional. They're misconceptions. And then you've got the virtues, which are valid and are not misconceptions at a relative level, and they're the source of happiness. So the third category, instead of calling them neutral, I prefer to call them the mechanics of the mind. So in other words, without those, you wouldn't function. One of those is called good memory. If you forget what you're doing moment by moment, we call that Alzheimer's. We call that, whatever you want to call it, all those different terms. You can't put anything together more than a second by second. You've lost the plot. There's one called discrimination, which if you didn't have that, you'd be insane. Discrimination is the ability every millisecond to distinguish between this and this color and that shape and that size. It's miniature. It's million times a second. We couldn't function if we didn't have discrimination. Intention is there every millisecond. Volition, I will. It's the boss in the mind. That's every millisecond. It's there. Attention. If we couldn't pay attention, we'd be insane. Concentration, alertness. There's so many of these that are crucial. Whether you're a murderer or a meditator, you need these. It's in that sense, they're neither negative nor positive, but they're utterly necessary. And there are actually many of these are developed brilliantly in single-pointed concentration. So there's another one, and this is so important to understand. It's called feeling, and not an equivalent of emotion, not like we call. It's bare bones. It's neither good nor bad. It's neither negative nor positive, but it's vital there. It's there all the time. There's never a second, based on the way we're constructed with our body and mind, that we're not having either, and there's only three kinds of feeling. This is getting to the point now. There's either a pleasant feeling, an unpleasant feeling, or a neutral feeling. Well, let's forget the neutral, please. Not interested. Let's look at the pleasant and the unpleasant. Now, we will talk about states of mind. We will say happiness. We will say suffering. And we have a whole misconception about those. We so, conflate external event or person with the state of mind of happiness. Feeling, pleasant feeling is another word for the word happiness. Literally, happiness is a function of the mind and of the sensory consciousness, which triggers the body, no question, but it is not an external event. You think of this already. You say, oh, I'm so happy today. Tell me about your happiness, Robina, and I will tell you exactly what happened outside in the outside world. Because I believe that's where the happiness is. When I remember remember things, I remember the event, the person, the thing. We don't remember the happiness. The happiness is a state of mind. And of course, you can have a whole spectrum of happiness, can't you? You can have the mildest pleasant feeling to the most intense bliss. I'm waiting for that still. I haven't had that yet, but it's there, possibility. Ecstasy, rapture, joy, bliss, all these words, they're all synonyms for the term pleasant feeling. It's just degrees, isn't it? And now unpleasant feeling is another word for suffering. So you've got the most mild unpleasant feeling to the most intense unbearable agony. They are mental states and sensory consciousness states of mind. So they're neither negative nor positive. They're just the way it is. It's just the way we're structured. Now, this is the point. Buddha's entire method from here to Tantra to Buddhahood, his goal is to get us to stop all the unpleasant feelings, including lower realm suffering, including all the other ugly things that happen out there that trigger the unpleasant feelings, and to get us to have happy feelings all the time. That's it. That's what enlightenment is. And you combine that with bodhicitta, then you're this ingenious, amazing person who's a Buddha who helps others. So technically then, Tantra doesn't utilize attachment. Attachment is, so, okay, no, sorry, not that yet. So how do we get now? What are our methods for getting happy feelings? Because we all want happiness every millisecond, and we can't bear the thought of unpleasant feelings. We know that. So what do we do all our lives? Our life entirely is consisting, and that's the monkeys and the ants as well, of doing everything we can that will avoid the unpleasant feelings and doing everything we can to get the pleasant feelings. That's what all our lives are about. So all Buddha's saying is, I'm sorry, babies. I'm so sorry, you people. You're up a garden without, no, you're not up a garden without a paddle. You're up a creek without a paddle. You're up a garden path. You've lost a plot. You've got the exact wrong methods, baby. And he's not being mean. He says, I've got such methods, you won't believe it. And I'm not joking. I know I sound so silly sometimes. He's literally saying that. Of course, we can't hear it like that because we hear, this is the problem. We hear when he says, you've got to give up attachment. As Lama Zopa says, we go, oh, you mean I've got to give up my heart? I've got to give up my happiness? Because we understand, we think we're the same thing. And that's where we misconceive. That's where anybody who's religious, they become fanatic and fundamentalist and miserable. I mean, miserable people, because we don't understand what pleasant feelings are. So this is what Lama Yeshe from the very beginning would desperately, because he was seeing when we're hearing Buddhism and we're so angry, I'm so attached, I'm so jealous, I'm such a bad person, I'm so miserable. We have all this self-pity, We all get like this. And he was just desperately trying to lift us up, to give us a bit of pleasure. So he'd have picnics and parties. We think, oh, Lama loves picnics. He didn't love picnics. He couldn't care less about a picnic. He's trying to lift us up, to have some happiness, to have some joy, to try and dare to have the courage to have a happy mind. So the irony is, the Buddha's point, we think is an irony for us, that what he's telling us is that following attachment, which is a lie, a misconception at the gross level, we don't know, we can't do anything with it except just keep shoving the cake in, because we're convinced the object of attachment will give me happiness. And now this is the point. It does trigger happiness. There's no argument. It does definitely trigger happiness. And this is the second kind of suffering, the more subtle suffering. Buddha calls it the suffering of change. It's not wrong that when you have the best boyfriend in the planet, you can't believe the joy that was triggered. You're not lying. That's not a lie. It is pleasure. It is joy. Don't pretend. But the point is that Buddha's making, it's in comparison with the joy that even our mind is capable of, even before you've realized emptiness, but even just when you have achieved samadhi, when you've achieved single point of concentration. Please hear these words. This is how Lama talks in Mahamudra. The Lamas never go on about this. They never tell you all the marvelous qualities you accomplish when you've got samadhi. Lama does, because he's trying to lift us up, You can't even imagine the state of mind that we are capable of just getting single point of concentration. Lama talks about it, the bliss, the ecstasy, the rapture. I don't know where he got these words from, but he was incredible. I always think he was born a hippie, secretly, not really born in Tibet at all. I mean, he's literally, because the point the Buddha's making, that the nature of our mind, the very nature of our mind, when it's unencumbered by pollution, when it's unencumbered by the junkie of attachment, anger, jealousy, and all the dramas, which are the consequence of attachment, when there's our mind even temporarily is unencumbered by that stuff, the joy, he says, you don't believe it. Even I always quote my friend Venerable Renee, the Swiss monk who's a meditator for years, 40 years now, holy being. And I interviewed him in 95 in Mandala about one of his single point of concentration retreats. And that's just Sutra. I'm not talking Tantra yet. And he said he maybe just touched upon the 5th of the 9 stages of single point of concentration. And he said, Robina, there's no question that the joy his mind experienced was so superior to any joy he'd ever experienced on the basis of his senses. And that's the simple point that Buddha's making. But we can't hear it because we hear just this we hear this heavy punitive language. You've got to give up attachment, give up honor, give it up. So of course we think we've got to chuck out the baby with the bathwater. But all Buddha's saying is, you people being junkies at a gross level, the gross level for the objects of the senses, living in this junky world, this is the mistake we make. You think, and in fact, this is true for us. In fact, the only way we know how to get a pleasant feeling, please hear the words. What's our method? Think about it. It's so clear. We've got to have contact with a sensory object. Of course, occasionally you might have such good fantasies you can imagine and get some nice pleasure. People are very good with their fantasies, but it's all following attachment. There's no difference. But the usual one is the only way we think of happiness is what you get when you get the object of the senses, when you contact the cake, contact the boy, contact the sound, contact the smell. It's logic, and this is the method of the entire universe. Nobody questions this. This is taken as a given. But all Buddha's telling us in the second level of suffering is that you're right, Robina. The cake did trigger, it is not a lie, it does trigger pleasant feelings in your mind and your sensory consciousness. There's no question. But all he's saying is, and this is where it's hard for us to hear it, he says, but it's contaminated. And really the best analogy is the pleasure of a junkie. Now, you see a person who's an alcoholic, even mildly alcoholic, or even a mild junkie. You can see, if you're not, that it's kind of frantic, it's kind of desperate. You know very well that, and the hunger is so enormous. And that's what the attachment is. Look at us with our attachment to cake. The hunger is so gigantic. And it's so distressing, that hunger. It's so frantic and so horrible. So then when the anticipation of the cake comes, gradually the happiness starts to come. It's all the anticipation. Then you get the cake and you put it in the mouth. And it does trigger pleasure. That is called pleasure. But they say even the pleasure, and that's exactly what Renee said. He tasted the pleasure of his natural state of mind that even temporarily was unencumbered by the gross delusions and the gross senses, just temporarily in the 5th stage. He's gotten more now, that's years ago. And he said the joy, the pleasure, hear the words, please. It's not religious pleasure, that's pathetic, It's called pleasure. It's called joy. It's called ecstasy. Lama calls it rapture. Maybe, Renee didn't say that. joy. His mind was joyful, more than any joy he'd ever experienced through his senses. So the point is that everybody who says about meditation, you read about it, it's a very peaceful joy. Now you think of joy when it comes to a handsome boyfriend, it's the opposite to peace. I mean, it's berserk, you know, because it's based on the senses. And this is a tragedy that we know is true, but we can't bear to hear it. As Buddha tells us very politely, Robina, the joy you get from the cake and the best sex in the universe, it will not last. And this is what I find fascinating. It's almost like annoying to hear Buddha say it won't last. We know it's true, but we honestly do not have any other method. Think about this. This is the essence of understanding the central point that Buddha makes about the suffering of samsara. Forget the garbage suffering. Forget being punched in the nose and beaten up. That's evident. But this is way more subtle for us to see, and we are hooked completely by the lie of attachment because we're so frantic, and it's reasonable because we don't know how else to get joy. We don't have any other method to get joy. So what do? We keep creating more fantasy objects. And then we have sex in this hole and that hole, upside down with two people, and try this way and try that way. Then we'll try animals. Then we'll try dolls. Please hear my point, because we are completely dissatisfied because attachment is a bottomless pit of dissatisfaction. So this is the nightmare of samsara. Buddha is not being mean. He's trying to point out what's evident. Then if we can start to believe this and understand and see the logic of it, not believe it, see the logic of it. So he is saying pleasure is triggered. But it's so contaminated by our grossness, so contaminated by our junky mind of emotional hunger. And we all know this. You eat that, you know, in the morning when I do my practice, and I try to be disciplined to do my practice every morning properly, or half the time I'm thinking of my breakfast. I promise you. And I'm really, you learn not to believe in it. You learn not to buy into it. But the habits are so deeply strong inside all of us, you know. We should be very kind to ourselves. We are all junkies, Buddha's saying. We're all junkies. We don't know how to, so we keep hoping the next breakfast will do it, the next cup of coffee will do it, the next cake. And so, of course, with our intelligence and our creativity, which is coming from attachment, we keep creating new objects and 40,000 cakes and 57 ways of having boyfriends and 57 ways of having, look, I see my point. It's not moralistic. It is practical. It is evident. So it should be the source of unbelievable compassion for all of us, you know. So the point is, pleasant feeling. Lama Yeshe would all the time say, the more pleasure, the better, dear. We just think he's so cute, you know. He's literally meaning the truth. And this is the point, even just using the sutra practices, of the single point of not concentration, as Renee said. And as Lama says in Mahamudra, you can't believe the joy you experience, but it's not frantic, it's not grasping, it's not greedy, it's not gross. It's just the mind in its natural state of being joyful, meaning being satisfied. Oh, I'm so looking forward to it. So the first level to try and get a bit of experience is to control your body, please. Control your speech. And control your mind, then you get more. The irony is, and they don't talk about this in the lamrim, they never say, you're going to get more happy and more joyful and more blissful every time you give up attachment. They don't tell us that. They keep telling us not to be attached. They're all a bit fundamentalist, the Tibetans, I think. 10th century fundamentalists, how they talk, isn't it? So you can't get that you're going to get happy. That's why Lama Yeshe was so amazing. He kept pointing out that aspect, because we need to hear that. So it was so uplifting. I know when I first heard my first course with Lama Zopa, lamrim, 1 month, I knew I'd found my path. I was having a mental breakdown because all these men I'd been a radical lesbian separatist feminist at the final stages of my political activity, knowing I wanted a spiritual path, and I found these lamas. And I was having really intense for me, but I knew it was my path. Now I forgot what I was going to say. Oh yeah, 1 month of Lama Zopa, intense lamrim, 5 in the morning till 10 at night, 7 days a week, 1 month. I was happy. I went to every session. And then Lama Yeshe would come occasionally, and I was just like thinking, lost, confused with what's going on here. Where's the Dharma? Where's Buddhism? I don't know what he's talking about. I heard the word karma. Something rang a bell there. I was glad about that. But I went every time. And then Lama Yeshe would come along at night, and I would just sigh with relief. Oh, Lama just made sense because he talked like I'm his daughter. I'm not talking like Lama, but Lama, that's where I got this from Lama's way. He just saw the misery and the hopelessness and the self-pity and the self-loathing and the hunger and the emotional misery. And now we're all going to be spiritual. We're going to be all tight, and I'm going to be spiritual. I'm going to suffer. I'm going to give up attachment. Lama, give it a break, babies. Relax. He kept trying to get us to relax, and try and taste our joy. I mean, don't hear this as trippy hippie. It's so profound, but it's scary to do that because we love to be negative. We love to hate ourselves. We're addicted to misery. We are addicted. That's the irony, of egos, the irony, So all that's in the first stage. So Lama kind of grabbed the aspect from Tantra and sort of plonked it on us because we got all this energy, got all this attachment, and he tried to get us to see how we could even just forget about using attachment. Just how about being happy when you have the cake? How about, and then of course you have bodhicitta and you offer the cake and you want to offer the joy as well. But when we start to be Buddhist, I'm not allowed to have cake. Oh no, I can't have any pleasure because we thought pleasure was attachment. It's not. They're completely separate states of mind, but they're so tightly together. That's why we assume they're the same, but they're not. They're completely different. Pleasure is not a delusion. Pleasure is not a virtue either. It's just the way we're constructed. And so controlling the body and speech initially and the mind is the method to then get to the point where our mind can start to expand and our ability for happiness. What contentment means is a boring word, but it means happy. And what's a happy mind? It means you're less greedy, less emotionally hungry, less neurotic, less angry, less depressed, less anxious, less self-loathing. That's all it means. You don't give up that and become nothing. What is in place of that is more contentment, more fulfillment, more comfort, more self-confidence, more joy. That's the beginning of happiness. That's the beginning of pleasant feelings. And then because we live in this crazy world with, dollars falling out of our ears and magnificent things and the ability, most of us might not be rich, but we've got the ability to get what we want most of the time, just like that. It gets delivered to us now. Look at Amazon, all these people. Well, it's the fruit of our virtue. We can get what we want, when we want, how we want. That's the fruit of virtue, but it's attachment, so we create all these marvelous things. But we don't know how to have, and as Lama kept pointing this out, we don't know how to have pleasure. We know how to be miserable. We don't know how to have pleasure. We're too scared. It sounds like a sin, But pleasure is simply a happy mind. That's what it is, a happy mind. That's what pleasure means. Pleasant feeling is another word for happy. That's it. So it's not negative. So the Lama would always say the more pleasure, the better, dear, So, so then, yeah. So this is profound. I mean, to try, and I could see it in my own process when Lama was my teacher, and because, I was trying to practice and trying to be a good girl. And I wanted to, my practice mostly wasn't sitting on my bum doing things. I couldn't stand to sit down and close my eyes. It was the stupidest thing I'd ever heard. I don't want to meditate. I wanted to work on my mind. That's a fact. That was sit quietly. I'd have exploded. So, so I did all these jobs, Lama Zopa, Lama Yeshe, and my gurus, but they're also my boss, right? I work for them, So from the very beginning, because they're skillful, holy beings, and I'd given them permission, they're my lamas. I chose them. Well, Lama first, then Rinpoche. So, I wanted to practice. So this is how the lamas use skillful methods. They didn't use peaceful means. Lama Yeshe did not use peaceful means. He was sweet to me, but he gave me hard jobs to do. He gave me jobs I didn't want to do. I was convinced I was going to run wisdom publications at the very beginning. I was so blissed. I felt my whole life was my apprenticeship. I'd done graphics and design and printing and everything. I was ready for it. Always on the propaganda side all my life. I couldn't believe I'd finally found my home. I'd finally found my path. I was in heaven. I was going to run this. When I was at Kopan, we were organizing it. We were doing all these things in Delhi. I had an entire book list organized. I was just blissful. And I did my Vajrasattva retreat. And I get a note from Nick Rebush that Lama's sending us all to England and Wisdom's going to go to England and Robina can be the secretary. Well, I nearly died. I nearly fainted. I could not believe. I said to myself, poor Lama, he doesn't understand. I nearly went mad. So my practice all those years was dealing with my garbage and dealing with my anger and dealing with my attachment. He sort of like was sitting on me, I thought I'd die, but I knew it was practice. It wasn't like sitting there looking all holy. Forget about bliss. I wouldn't have known about bliss. It was torture, tasting my own anger and garbage. I didn't know how to be happy. I had no idea, It was so intense because you're dealing with your own delusions. That's inevitable. But slowly, maybe now I can be a bit happy now after 59 years of trying. Anyway, I'm raving like a maniac, you people. Are we communicating? It's 1/4 the hour, as they say on the television, because they're talking to time zones. 1/4 the hour. We started an hour and a quarter away, 7 years. So I think it's time for some questions. I'm raving on here. I'm just beginning the discussion, okay? We're beginning this concept, this approach to understanding Tantra. So a bit more, then I'll ask you questions. So as you're progressing, as you get less delusion, less neurotic, less ego grasping, less misery, you get more joyful. Keep hearing these people. They mightn't say it like that, but that's the point. You get more content, more fulfilled, more joy, beginning already way back in the Sutra path. Then you get to Bodhisattva path, and you add to that compassion, you add, and you become even more joyful. I mean, when you hear these holy beings, like Lama Yeshe Lama Zopa, like, they're my teachers. And I always think when I was being in a retreat up in India, Tushita, and their room was on the other side of the corridor. Well, you just hear these peals of hysterical laughter day and night, These people are so blissful you can't contain. They're just hilariously joyful all the time. It doesn't make sense to us. We can't comprehend that, because that's joy and delusions gone, plus joy added, plus bodhicitta. They're like in love with the world. They're in love with beings, Lama Zopa, when he had a stroke in 2011, and we're at our center in Australia, and he had this stroke. Normally, if you have a stroke, you freak out, and all the family's distraught, and there are tears. Well, these Catholic nuns, this Catholic hospital where he went in this little town called Bendigo, 2 hours north of Melbourne. And even that evening, Roger was videoing Rinpoche because he wanted to send messages. And Rinpoche had an interview the night he had his stroke, the next day, I think. And he sounded like a drunken sailor. He sounded a drunk, senile sailor. He was all swollen from the drugs, and his speaking like, couldn't understand, and he was laughing hysterically. In the hospital, he was laughing hysterically. His compassion increased 4 million times. He was joyful the whole time. These Catholic nuns couldn't get over these weird Tibetans. There's Roger day and night sitting there in a chair, these Tibetan monks. Rinpoche, just all they're laughing the whole time. And that's how you are when you don't have delusions. This is not even discussing Tantra yet, because the mind is naturally joyful when it's virtuous people. So ask me some questions now, come on. Any old questions, I don't care. About what I've talked about, not other things.
Venerable Robina, it's Barbara. I have a question.
Yes, sweetie pie.
Yes. You had said that there are 4 methods that deities use to appear.
Or even the gurus. Peaceful,
wrathful,
angry. The one that's the manifestation of attachment, which is literally seductive. Seducing energy, power, control. How people talk about control freaks, when people are really good at running everything and organizing, that's an aspect of attachment that can be utilized. Many of the deities have that one utilized. They can utilize the controlling, powerful aspect, the seductive aspect, the transformed attachment, in other words. And the 4th one is called increasing. I don't quite know how a person manifests that. I don't know what that means. Mainly that's seen in terms, I don't know how the deities do that one. I'm not quite sure what that means. So it's peaceful, angry, and attachment. Transforming the 3 energies. You can. The 4th one is controlling, increasing. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Huh?
Hey, Venerable, this is Som.
Where are you? Oh, yes, Som. Hi, sweetheart.
Thank you for your teaching.
Sure.
Could you speak a little bit more about the psychological process that occurs when using attachment in Tantra?
You mean a more advanced level? No, not yet. What I'm trying to do, Som, okay, what I'm trying to do here is, even the way that Lama's talking, if you can try and learn to be a bit joyful, that is a way. So in other words, when you eat, a simple example, Som, for all of us, this level, right, this level, normally if we're really attached to cake, think about this, really grasping at cake, or really grasping at a girl, or really grasping at alcohol. We all understand this. When the grasping is so dominant, the reason we're eating the cake is to get pleasure. Would you agree? Would you agree with that? But if the attachment is so strong, you forget about pleasure. You almost don't have any pleasure. Do you see what I'm saying? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes,
So then
of course,
this
yes.
is what Lama was trying to get us to do, to see that you can have the cake and eat it too. Don't just become fundamentalist and give up the cake. But this is the bodhisattva one. Forget the tantric one, but it's related. That when you've got the attachment for the cake, stop believing so hungrily in that cake as if it's all out there in you and you're nothing. Because attachment is like you're nothing and the cake's everything. Get some power back, please, and just be a bit more mindful. See the cake, imagine it's delicious, delight in it, and then eat it and try and experience the joy that it triggers. That's using attachment right there, Som.
I see.
Yeah, my point. Not
Yes,
just being,
yes.
oh, I'm being mindful, I'm eating slowly, I mean, that's boring. Notice the pleasure and enjoy it. Don't be like a vampire, and shove the next piece in, and then before you know it, you're on the floor drunk. That's the way we are with attachment now. We're like animals with respect to animals. Be a bit more spacious, please. A bit less greedy, a bit less grasping. Like with you, I mean, I'm trying to be too gross, but I can't help it. But when everybody, people have partners and they hop into bed with each other, I've noticed. I don't want to do that anymore anyway. I didn't get any pleasure from that. It was too intense. Anyway, never mind. Then don't just jump on each other and be like greedy pigs, or be drunk or anything. Even this is very interesting. I know there's a wonderful book published by a couple of American women who interviewed Tibetan mothers about how they prepare to have babies, their approach to babies. It was just like a baby book. It's got this cute little photo of a cute little Tibetan baby in a yak skin. It looks so gorgeous, a little naked baby kicking its feet, just like a baby book. But it was so fascinating. So the Tibetan mothers, their approaches, they do lots of purification, lots of four opponent powers, pray lot to Tara, and then when they did have sex, they'd have really joyful, generous, kind sex. They didn't say it so bluntly, instead of just jumping on like pigs. Because if you've got greedy, grasping mind, the consciousness that comes to your womb, in a sense, think this through. This is my own analysis. The way we have sex now, so gross, and I'm not being fundamentalist, please hear my point. We've got no awareness, we feel guilty about it, we're greedy, we jump on each other, we're drunk, we're out of our brain, stoned. There's no awareness, there's no consciousness. But if you're a little bit more conscious, then don't be surprised that we're attracting crummy consciousnesses to come to this realm. No wonder we're dragging the human earth, the human planet down. And I'm not trying to make this saying this sounds like tantra, it's tantric sex. Don't misunderstand me. I'm just speaking simply. Enjoy your cake. Don't just feel guilty and greedy and grasp at it. That immediately softens the mind, and then you can really enjoy the joy and taste the pleasure. And then, of course, if you're skillful, you'd offer the pleasure. You'd offer the cake. That's very much part of the Bodhisattva path and the Tantric. You offer the joy. You offer the cake. You offer your mind. It's a very marvelous approach, Do you understand?
I see. Thank you very much. I do understand. Thank you.
Yeah. This is the way Lama trying to get us to be, It's so, we understand it, We do understand it. It's very interesting. Thank you so much, Sam. What else, people? Who else? Anyone else? No questions? Huh? Nothing.
Amy.
Good, Amy. Talk to me, darling.
I was just wondering, whenever you were talking about pleasure and enjoying everything, it kept on coming into my mind the part of Buddha's story whenever after he had tried to renounce everything to the point of being, starving to death almost, and then the boy brought...
I missed the first part of your sentence.
Huh?
Amy, what was the subject of the verb? I missed the first part of your sentence.
Oh, sorry. I was just, when you were talking about how Lama had told you to enjoy things and to have pleasure and really just take that in. I was wondering, it kept on coming into my mind, the part of Buddha's story after he had gone through such intense renunciation. And then he was meditating by the Bodhi tree, I believe, and then the stranger brought him a bowl of rice. And I think it was
That's
at
right.
that moment that he realized that he didn't have to torture himself.
That's right, exactly, yeah.
And then he all of a sudden realized the beauty of his wife, the beauty of his son, the beauty of life, and like he's had this huge realization moment. Is that the kind of pleasure that does it correlate
I
with?
would say that's not technically it's not technically called tantra, and even what Lama's telling us, in a way, it's common sense. Yes, that's right, exactly. And so the point is, You know, yes, so then we can be, so that the point in that story is that when there's nothing wrong with renouncing sex, drugs and rock and roll. That's what a monk and nun does. It's a really excellent practice, and you go to the mountains and you really work very hard and you get concentration. But it's seeing the extreme one of renunciation, the extreme one of energizing pain in order to get, and that's where it's fanatic. So it's a fanatic attitude. I think that's the teaching in Buddhism, not to be fanatic. Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
That's right. Thank you. It's a good point, Amy. Thank you. Who else, people? Nobody.
Venerable Robina.
Yes, Susie.
Susie.
Darling. Yes, sweetheart.
Can I use the analogy of cake for sex, or is sex a different thing altogether?
No, they're all the same. In the end, it's the same as an object. Think of it. We've got the five senses, okay? Isn't it? We've got the five senses. So obviously sex is, there are objects of our mind. There is the mind, which is a subject, and there's both mental consciousness, which is all the conceptual, and then the sensory consciousness, that's subject. Then all of our states of mind have objects, demand objects. So we know very well the five senses. So eye consciousness has shape and color, ear has sound, obviously nose has smell. Now, obviously the tactile, which is the one involved, and probably all the other senses as well. Actually, it's a very complete experience, but especially tactile, because tactile is the entire body. That's obviously what's involved in sex. But the added point about sex is that it's a human being. So there's a whole other dimension to it and makes it more complex and more complicated. But the bare bones function of sexual, okay, we call it sexual attachment, don't we? That's the term we use. So actually, attachment is attachment is attachment. There's not a fraction of difference in the mind, and that's a mental state that over-exaggerates the deliciousness of the shape, the color, or the person. So attachment is a conceptual state of mind. This is where, again, the difference between the sensory and mental consciousness. So this is where we not only conflate attachment with pleasure, but we conflate sensory and mental. So because, for example, men have I try not to be too gross, but I can't help but cracking jokes. But I remember I always told this story, and I don't know if you were there one time, but one of my friends, he talked about when he was 6 years old, and he was walking down the street in Athens, and you heard the story maybe before, and he says, "Mummy," and he saw a picture of a lady at the cinema, "Why is my penis standing up?" So the way we think like that, there's a little boy 6 years old, God in heaven, what's happened, We think sexual thing is a body, but the body is just the physical thing that's joined with consciousness. And the Tibetan one of the Tibetan medical system, all the wind energies connected to attachment go completely berserk, and it hits the nerves, and then something stands up. That's physical. That's not attachment. But the mind is running rampant and going berserk because he had the karmic tendency to like girl shapes. So his mind completely exaggerated just by seeing that poster from the karmic imprints in his past life. He exaggerates the deliciousness of girl shapes, and then the whole of his nervous system goes bonkers, and his little thing stands up. It's the physical and the mental. Now, attachment is not a function of the body. It's a function of the conceptual mind totally exaggerating the deliciousness of girl shapes. That's attachment. So we call it sexual because the body is experiencing a very delicious pleasure. And of course, I remember even one time in a conference with a whole bunch in a Catholic school, a Christian school. It was a philosophy talk for the Christians and the Muslims and the Arabs and the Muslims and the Jews, a whole bunch of us all talking. And then the whole business of sexual pleasure came in. And I noticed that most of them talked about, that's a mystery, it's a gift from God, all that kind of talk. I mean, that's not how Buddhism talks. In other words, the point about sexual attachment, it's still just objects that trigger pleasure. And it happens to be that our usual view is when it's an object that triggers that pleasure, it's very intense pleasure. But there's nothing unique about it we call it sexual. It's just very delicious pleasure. That's all. Very extreme pleasure. And it's based on contact of the tactile consciousness with an object. And that's usually called a person. I mean, unless you're a furry and you like the dogs, Do you understand, Susie, what I'm saying?
Yes,
But
thank
a lot
you.
of things involved, as well as a person and love and all those other things get mixed up. We've got to analyze each component. So pleasure is pleasure, Susie. And that's just a feeling that arises in the mind and the sensory consciousness. And for us, we get it by having contact with an object. Now, you listen to some torturers who get, as one guy in America, one well-known torturer who killed many people, and he confessed all his tortures, and he said he got what he called sexual, he called it sexual pleasure when he tortured people. Now, we can't cope with hearing that. That's because he's got a strong connection with torture from big animals in the past life. And he gets, and that torture for him is what triggers pleasure. Most of us think of that as having to be a girl or a boy that triggers the pleasure, but anything from past habit can trigger pleasure. Pleasure is just the habit. You get the pleasure because of the intensity of the connection with that type of object over many lifetimes. Are you with me?
I have some old conditioning that thinks that you connect deeper if you have sex with someone.
Well, of course you can. Of course you do. Of course you do. It's very intense. It's very total kind of annihilation of your usual sense of self. The pleasure is unbelievable. The mind is more subtle. If you've got love, and of course it's all true. It's all true. But the point is, look at the more, normally speaking in our world, the more pleasure we get, the more dangerous it is, because we've got the grosser level of the attachment, which wants to possess the person. I mean, look at the despair. If a person you're in love with and you had the best pleasure in the universe, and then tomorrow they leave you, look at it's like falling off a mountain, and you can't possibly not have that despair and suffering when you've got gross attachment. Of course, but look at the downside. It's like saying there's the best pleasure of the best cake in the world. You're right, cakes are delicious, but the downside is you want to vomit if you eat too much. That's the point of this attachment. So it does trigger good feelings, Buddha's saying. But this is what Renee said. You see, also the other point, sorry, Susie, because we're so attached, so emotionally hungry, I think the joy that we experience when we have contact like that with another person, because we're hungry to be loved, we're hungry to be seen, we're hungry to be approved of. So that's the best approval in the universe. Just having your girlfriend or your boyfriend just look at you with loving eyes, it's enough to faint with joy, because that's the attachment to reputation being satisfied, baby. So there's more to it than just the mere pleasure of the body. It's because you've been approved of by somebody. It's the most blissful experience in the universe. That's why we're devastated when the person gives you up. Otherwise, you wouldn't mind, you know. You hear my point?
I get that, yeah, very much so.
Good, darling. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's sort of like technical. We've got to work out all the bits in there, the components, and work out what is this and what is that and where does this come from and why is this. But we normally just have it as one big fat experience, you know. We can't see we're not nuanced enough about it. That's why I find this approach so practical, so helpful to unpack it all. Do you understand? Yeah. Okay. And that's why, okay, now bringing this up, and this is possibly Som's point, at the most advanced levels, when we understand the way the human body is constructed, that's what these great yogis have discovered, the tantric yogis. When you understand the structure of the body and this ability to have joy, it's a physical component that enables us, having the white and the red kundalini, these particular drops in the body. It's all very technical how they describe why we're able to be triggered such pleasant feelings, why our physical body is enabling us to do that. It's a technical thing. So the greatest yogis are able to energize that level of bliss by contact with a sensory object. But because that then is joined with concentration, and it's so powerful, it gets the concentration to the very subtlest level. And that's the level of mind you're trying to get to, because that level of mind is the mind that can get enlightened. So that literally the only person who can use that level of bliss without the mind going berserk, who's got no attachment, no jealousy, no anger, no neuroses, and only infinite wisdom, infinite compassion, and infinite powerful qualities. That's the person who can literally utilize it to that degree, simply as a method to get the mind to the subtlest level, and then you can get enlightened. That's the literal final purpose of tantric practice. Literally that. You with me? But see, we're talking the psychology and the philosophy around this concept, which is the way Lama Yeshe talks about it. You with me? It's like a technical thing in the end.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah. Okay, good.
It really hit a nerve when you said the needing the love and the attachment.
That's right,
and
exactly, Susie. I mean, we don't even begin. We can't separate that from the pleasure of the physical, but it's got nothing to do with the physical. It's just when you're in love with somebody, you've never had such approval in your entire life, and that is like completely making us. And this is the suffering showing that we think we're nothing until someone else says we're something. That's the despair, and that's why the devastation when that goes. That's why the devastation. That's why, because the approval is stopped. That's the devastation.
If you truly love them, set them free.
That's right. Wouldn't matter. No, that's right. If you love a
Set them
person,
free.
you want them to be happy. There wouldn't be much suffering at all. That's the point.
And then if it's not with me,
That's
if
exactly
you're not happy with me,
exactly right. That's doesn't matter. That's exactly because you're so
then
fulfilled.
fly.
You're so joyful and happy in yourself.
Mm.
And that's the part that's very hard to hear. We can't sort of get that, but that's the point. That's the whole point. Yeah, that's right.
I've understood that for a long time, but it's just had some crap in the way.
No, I know there's no real analysis of it out there somehow, but I think this is the Buddhist one. I don't, with respect, quite skillful way to, once we understand it, we can articulate it in this way that makes sense to us.
Thank you so much.
Good, darling. Thank you. Okay, people, what else, sweethearts?
Venerable Robina.
Yes,
Christina.
Katrina, yes, darling. Hi.
Thank you so. I'm good, thank you. Thank
Good,
you so much
sweetheart.
for the teachings.
Good, darling.
I have a question about what you just said about speaking around the point. And last week, I think you mentioned something about the implicit meanings, and I was just wondering that with Tantra, is there, because it's being taught, because we're learning about the concepts of it, is it then the practice where we get the implicit understanding of the things that you're talking about?
Don't quite understand what you're saying, sweetheart. I'm so sorry.
Like sometimes, sometimes when you say,
Go on.
I was just saying, sometimes when you say things like, you say that's the exact meaning. So like the sentence, and I try to think, okay, that's explicitly what you're talking about. But then sometimes we talk about concepts around, and there's like an internal or implicit meaning, and I was just wondering if there are some concepts in Tantra like that where we can only
I know, but I'm sure there are, but I can't think of anything to be particularly relevant here, sweetheart.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. I can't think of anything much to say. Thank you, darling.
May I ask a quick question?
Who is I? Where are you? I'm Joel. Who are you? Hello there. I'm happy to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Yes, ask me a question.
I just you talked about the conceptual side of attachment, and then the kind of the physical, maybe
That's right, the grosser
pleasurable
level.
side is
The
more
incredible
towards the
emotional hunger, the greed.
right.
Yeah. That's right.
On the other side. But
Yeah.
my question is maybe the psychology. You can talk a little bit about. Is there a psychology of boredom that probably is associated with attachments? Because it seems like super creativity, embellishment, is moving away from something I would think like boredom.
Exactly. So I think that's an interesting point. So I think that means if I think, okay, all the Buddhist psychological model talks about we live at the level of conceptuality. In this world, at the gross level, we live at the level of conceptuality. And that's sort of initially surprising to us. And that's why we're trying to see even these emotional, all the intense emotions, anger and attachment, we get so thrown by the physical component, we can't hear that they're driven by highly developed conceptual elaborations. So anger is like, how dare you do that to me? I don't deserve this elaborate philosophy in our head. It's basically a conceptual story that we built up. But because it's so strong and the violence is so strong and the body's so involved and the rage inside us, we just see it as physical and we just can't even imagine it's conceptual. So if your attachment's at that level, more gross in the terms of the gross delusions, like greedy for sex and greedy for harming or greedy for fishing or greedy for killing or greedy for eating, the really gross level, it's still conceptuality, but at a very dull, gross level. But if you're a clever person like, say, Bach, who seemed obviously to have some virtue, he was in love with God, he was a very holy being, he obviously didn't have many gross delusions, but he had this incredibly sophisticated capacity to enhance sound. So that he had that level of attachment, but it was mixed with virtue and mixed with good ethics. So it lifts it up. That's my way of putting it, Whereas if you mostly gross at the gross level, which is the animals, I mean, animals only have the gross level. They don't have the clever conceptuality, but they're living at the personification of the gross level of all the delusions. And when humans, we're more like animals without being insulting to animals, when we've got mainly the gross level, which is about the body and the senses. Do you understand what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
Yeah. How would you tie the boredom component to it? Would you?
Okay, so tell me what you think. So explain to me boredom then.
Boredom seems to me the antithesis to creativity, like you talked about the super creativity and the exaggeration, the embellishment. And it seems like the reason why that we want to make all those different sorts of cakes and all those different sorts of sweets is because we get bored.
Okay, well, that's
with
called
that.
dissatisfaction. The Buddhists would say that's dissatisfaction, and that's a very agitated state. I think boredom is a sign of deep ignorance, just a lazy mind that gets it very thick, and that's more like gross ignorance. I'd suggest boredom. Whereas, well, I don't think it's boredom that causes us to keep creating new cakes. It's an overexcited state of mind, always anticipating something more, always want something more, and put cleverness with that. That gets all the endless cakes. That's not boredom. That's dissatisfaction combined with cleverness. Many people are dissatisfied and just sit there being miserable. They don't use creativity. But if we've got an intelligent mind and a more optimistic mind and a virtuous mind, I think you mix that with the capability, with the attachment, then you can turn it into something useful. It becomes creativity then, I'd say. You with me? Boredom, I think, is just ignorance. Can't be bothered, like bored, so bored. Nothing excites you. Nothing excites you.
Yeah,
I don't think boredom is
would that be tied to more
but I don't think boredom causes you to get creative. It's constant dissatisfaction with the present. Look at Steve Jobs, amazing genius of creativity, because he could see the way things were and he kept finding fault with it and he wanted to make it better. That you could combine that with kindness and intelligence and you've got a brilliant person. But have just animal type attachment that's just endlessly dissatisfied, becomes more miserable and more fat and more depressed and more drunk and more crazy. I'm not criticizing us all, but boredom is just a type of ignorance. The three root delusions are ignorance, attachment, and anger. That's just can't be bothered. That's a gross ignorance, I would suggest. Boredom. Do you not agree?
Well, it seems like what I kind of understood you to say, maybe I'm reading into it, is that it could be tied more to the senses, that blunting of the senses, that it's no more exciting, that's boredom, and that's still in that realm of the body.
That's the
still
mental
the realm, right?
It's
It's still
mental, but that's
right.
mental consciousness. That's the attitude in the mind. The thoughts are very lazy, can't be bothered. It's the thoughts, and then that then comes over into being the senses. Of course, the senses are the secondary ones. The senses are the result of the concepts. Actually, concepts come first. You with me? What do you think? I mean, always trying to get.
I tend to think that there's kind of a mutuality between the arising of the senses and the concepts that seem to arise from sometimes the senses, but also I do think that the concept can influence the mode in which we sense the world.
In the end, the Buddhist analysis is that what goes on in the mental consciousness runs everything, and the more we consciously become aware of that, the more we can control that, and the more we'll see it. The senses are really like dumb animals. There's no volition in sensory. No volition whatsoever. It's just experiences things, But then we give more power to the senses than they really have. The mental consciousness runs everything. That's the Buddhist analysis. They're the ones that, the senses just they're just like dumb animals. We give them way more power than they have. I mean, it's interesting points you're talking. It's very helpful. Okay, thank you. What else, people? Anything else? Mary, any other questions in the chat box?
Venerable Robina, can you hear me? Okay. Am I understanding this correctly? Lama Yeshe tells us to learn to think and speak and act now as if we were free of all our delusions and attachments, as if we have already a clear mind and trying to enjoy.
Okay, so that's the whole approach of doing these practices of these deities, which we're going to talk about next week. That's the whole essence of the approach of these deities. John talks about in the teachings, there's the causal path and then the resultant. So the whole approach of visualizing, for example, Vajrayogini, who is the manifestation of purified attachment. You do these different practices and you visualize her and you do these prayers and practices and whatever. So what you're visualizing, it's like a mirror image of your potential. You're actually imagining there's the perfect result and you identify with, they talk about it being the future result by practicing it now, you bring it into the present. It's like the ultimate of positive thinking. You imagine yourself winning, winning the gold medal. You imagine yourself winning Wimbledon. You imagine yourself making that movie. You can see it exactly. You're imagining how it will be, and you're trying to identify with that now. And that's the key approach of Tantra when we do these deity practices, which we can talk about starting next week.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. But we can take that general attitude into daily life. So Lama will talk a lot to us about the way we identified ourselves. We had because we were so self-centered and so miserable. And we had this whole, especially the hippie idea, and that's okay, that you can not, and there's a good side to it, that you renounce, that you don't care how you look, you don't care about money, you don't care about clothing. Lama could see that was a really good quality, but we over-exaggerated that and ended up having low self-esteem, and you had no self-respect, and you have no feeling also of compassion, that you walk around smelling, looking ugly, not caring what you look like, and not caring about the impact you have on other people. So this is also the one of compassion. So Lama, the attitude in Tantra is, have some self-respect and imagine yourself as a deity now. Imagine yourself as Tara. Okay, don't walk around naked with your breast showing, you get arrested. But you imagine you're the energy of Tara. So you have this dignity, this self-respect, this self-worth, as well as having the compassion attitude. I always quote Grace Kelly. Grace Kelly, that wonderful actor, she said, of course I have to look beautiful. People have to look at me. So that's an attitude very much both of bodhicitta and the tantric one, that you know that other people will meet you, other people will hear you, other people will talk to you. I remember when I was Lama's attendant for about a week or 10 days in London one year, and I was having a really tough time and everything, and he was so intense with me. It was a big learning for me. And I was a nun at the time. I remember I was taking him back to his room, and this woman wafted by, she had this nice perfume. And he said, oh, she smells nice. Not you stink like a toilet. Lama was always very blunt, Then he would laugh and say, oh, I'm just joking, dear. But the fact is, I did stink like a toilet because I didn't pay attention to my body. I didn't pay attention to how I smelled. So I was like offering this smelly body to other people. That's really uncool, I didn't have self-respect. So if you have self-respect and this attitude of kind of being, especially in Tantra, of being the deity, of course you wouldn't want to look ugly and smelly for the sake of other people. On your own, in your house, if you're living in a cave, be naked, be smelly, it doesn't matter. But it's because Tantra is mixed with bodhicitta, it's a good attitude for yourself, and then it makes other people happy as well. Does that make sense? Who asked me that question? Does it make sense?
Yes, it does.
Good, darling. Thank you, Aida. What else, people? It's 1:45. Nothing in the chat. Let me see the chat again.
Good evening. May I ask a question, Venerable, please?
Yes, sweetheart. Absolutely. Talk to
Thank
me.
you. You mentioned earlier the 5 families of the Buddhas, and
Yes.
then you mentioned the 4 ways of
Yes.
manifesting, like peaceful, wrathful, seductive, and increasing. I would like to know, in each of these families of Buddhas who are related to one particular poison, can each one of them manifest in all these ways?
That's a good point, isn't it? That's a good point. No, that's a good point. Let me think about that. My sense is this: if we think of, let's say we think of our Lama, because of course the attitude is we've chosen a person in human form who for us is the Buddha for us. Okay, so think of one person, Alessia. Let's say His Holiness. Let's say we all agree that maybe he's the top one, So let's say His Holiness, let's say he is the Buddha. Now you're going to find that one person, he will be wrathful with one person. He will be as sweet as anything with another person. He will use seductive means for another person. So a Buddha will have all those qualities, and according to the needs of the student, they will manifest each of those even in a row or even in one sentence. That, I think, is the way to put it. So then, therefore, you could argue, let's say, like Lama Yeshe. For example, Lama Yeshe, his main practice was Haruka Chakrasambhara, and that is the main male tantra that is the manifestation of purified attachment energy. So that's his aspect. That's Lama Yeshe's aspect. Each of us will find our own yidam, and that will be our aspect. But if he's a Buddha, he will show all the others according to the disciple. There's no doubt about that. There's no question. Do you understand my point? Which is your question. So yes, the answer is yes. You understand? Yeah. We get what we need from these lamas, from the deities. Thank you, Alessia.
Venerable Robina, Jackie has a question.
Good, Jackie. Talk to me. Where's Jackie? Talk to me, sweetheart.
So sorry, I'm slow to find the mic. I'm
Okay,
thinking
there you go.
I might wait until next week because my question had to do with the pitfalls of starting to, the pitfalls of seeing, beginning Tantra and, trying to imagine yourself as a deity. And there are some pitfalls, isn't it?
Tell me about
Like,
example.
well, I find myself rationalizing some impatience, my angers and impatience. I can rationalize this, saying, "Oh, I'm doing it for the sake of others." That's sort
That's
of
right.
a classic.
That of course but that's not the fault of Tantra. That's not even, that's even the Bodhisattva path. Forget about the Tantric path. That means you're deluded. You haven't done even high school properly. So
That's right.
We've got to be
And
humble.
yet I have these.
So like all levels of Jackie, like all levels of knowledge, if you're playing tennis and you decide you're going to go into Roger Federer's grade 7, and then you'll soon find out you're not qualified, then either you be brave enough and really learn from your mistakes and try to do the right thing, or but best is to judge where you're at before you leap in, isn't it? Exactly right. So one has to be intelligent.
I do agree that it is on me and not the Tantra for sure.
Right.
How do I become ready? How do I know when I'm ready then?
This is the point. To actually be qualified, to actually be properly qualified, to be as if we could qualify to go and play Federer actually, like the highest level, you'd have to have realized renunciation, realized emptiness, and realized bodhicitta. Now, we have not realized that, Jackie. So they say, Tsongkhapa says, the 3 prerequisites are to at least have a semblance of genuine recognition of and understanding of renunciation, bodhicitta, and emptiness, and having some humility, knowing your mind well, having devotion in the guru, having devotion in the Buddhas, and then knowing that just by taking the empowerment and doing your practices properly every day and keeping your word of honor and keeping your bodhisattva vows and keeping your lay vows as well as you can, you're sowing incredible seeds in your mind. So be so happy. So if you're devoted, you've got confidence in the teachings, you've got confidence in you've got some semblance of understanding of your own mind, you genuinely appreciate renunciation, bodhicitta, emptiness, all those combined, then you're ready, baby. But it doesn't mean you've got high realizations. But if you're delusional, then you're in serious trouble. Of course you are.
At least is it good that we catch ourselves in the crime of being delusional?
Darling, the point what I'm trying to say is, if you were actually realizing those 3 prerequisites, you wouldn't have a problem. But as 99.9% of us are not, we're all just trainees, then that's part of exactly what practice is. Just because you've taken an empowerment doesn't mean you won't have extra rage. This is if we're really brave enough, Jackie, and we understand. I remember a friend of mine who's done years and years and years of 3-4 year retreats, tantric retreats. He's a monk, and he at some point was out of his brain with extra levels of rage and anger. He was really shaken by it. So he went to Lama Zopa, and Rinpoche laughed and laughed and laughed and said, "Fantastic, the dirt has to come out. The dirt has to come out." So when we understand the practice, when we're really trying to practice, Jackie, the vomit will come. But that's what practice is. If we're courageous enough to see it and not be scared of it and to work with it, then that's actually what practice is, Jackie.
Thank you.
So be glad you're seeing your mind, baby. Do you see my point?
Thank you. That helps.
Good, Jackie. And the irony is, they say, even in the Sutra teachings about getting single-pointed concentration, Jackie, they say one of it's described, as you know, in the text in terms of 9 stages of cultivating single-pointed concentration. And Pabonka Rinpoche says one of the signs of success at the first of the 9 stages is that you think your mind's getting worse. No, he said, you're starting to see your mind. So this is a major point in practice. We have to distinguish between being angry and then seeing all the crazy angry thoughts, because they're very old habits. So they're all there all the time. We're just seeing them more nakedly. So we've got to have this courage to hear them, but not buy into them, to hear them and be overwhelmed, but not freak out and not be absorbed in them and believe in them. That's really what day-to-day practice is, you know. Do you understand, Jackie? Good. So good. Good, really important point. 7 minutes too.
Venerable Robina.
Yes, Christina.
Right, yeah, I just have another question about yidams and the different aspects of the Buddhas. Once we begin to more intimately and more nuanced way understand our own delusions, is it us who recognize the yidam and then we ask our teacher for guidance?
I understand.
Yeah.
It depends on the person. Some people will know immediately they meet the yidam is theirs, they'll know it. Other people will be told by their teacher. Yeah, according to the person. Many people are told, you know, and many people just recognize. Yeah. But my sense is very interesting because all these yidams, all these deities are all manifestations of different mental qualities, both deluded and virtuous. Then by knowing our own minds really intimately and well, in particular knowing our virtues, but also knowing our delusions, when we can know our main delusion, and the fact is there are millions, but in the end, either it's pride, attachment, or anger, or maybe jealousy. Honestly, they're the main ones. And if your main delusion is attachment, then if you get to know that, that means you wouldn't be a very angry person, and you wouldn't be so much arrogance or proud, but you'd be up and down like a yo-yo, always wanting this, always dissatisfied. So when you get to know attachment's your main yidam, a main delusion, you'd recognize your yidam. If your delusion is mainly pride, that means you suffer mightily in your life, always by feeling people don't appreciate you. You're always feeling offended by people. You're feeling insulted by people. You get shattered easily. That's really many people have that really strongly. You're always it's so painful how people treat you. Always upset about that. That's pride, as you may. So the deity will be evident. You can many of the wrathful deities, you know. And then if it's anger, if that's the main delusion, we've all got all of them. But anger, you'd really be evident. You'd be almost like you'd have this really fierce-looking look on you. So we've got to know our minds well. When you know your main delusion, you can begin to recognize your main practice, I tell you. It's very logical. It's all meant to be logical. It's like it's psychology. Do you understand? I mean, we all need all of them because we've got all delusions, but to find our main one. And so, you know, you can pray at it every day or see the deities you particularly like, or, you know, eventually we recognize, and then we get that empowerment. And that's the main practice in this life.
Robina?
What, sweetheart?
What's jealousy?
I think, well, the family is Ratnasambhava, I think, is the green one. No, Amoghasiddhi, I think he's green. He's the jealousy family. I don't know which deities would be jealousy. I don't know. Maybe it's mainly anger, attachment, and pride, actually. Or ignorance too. Ignorance particularly as well. That's the Vajrayana family. But it seems to me, you know, attachment, there's all kinds, there's all variations. And these high lamas, I mean, Lama Zopa, people often ask him for their practice, and he will often just do observations, and he will tell people their main deity for that life, you know. I can't think of who's a jealousy one. I don't know. Well, you people, I think it's time to go home. So this thinking, here we've been talking, hopefully something useful, ideas, concepts, attitudes, you know. May all these seeds be planted. May we nourish them with our understanding. May we recognize our yidam. May we recognize our main delusions. May we know our minds intimately and well, so we can recognize our yidam, so we can get the empowerments, so we can get enlightened. Think like this. So make this aspirations, you know. So we can use all these marvelous methods of the Buddha to quickly transform ourselves. Changchub semchog rinpoche, ma ke panam ke gyuchig, ke panyampa me payang, gong ne gong du, rava sho. And may we never develop, even for a moment, wrong views towards the deeds of our most precious gurus. With faith and respect gained from seeing their goodness, may their full inspiration flow into our hearts. So we'll talk about guru devotion as well. That's a crucial one for Tantra. We'll discuss all these as we go along. But please read the new versions of John's teachings. There's lots of headings, and it's more readable. So please, I really want you to read those teachings. Okay, people. Now the Romans and English can go to bed about 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning. What is it? 5 in the morning in Rome, where Alessia is, and 4 in the morning in London. You eager people, go to bed now. Or sit up, and if you're a yogini, you can go and do your practice, okay? Good night, darlings. Good morning, good night. Hello. Thank you and goodbye. Thank you.